What if the most haunting story of the Apollo 11 moon landing wasn't told by Neil Armstrong or Buzz Aldrin? Decades after the mission, a lesser-known astronaut has broken his silence to reveal chilling secrets from his journey around the dark side of the moon. Who is he, and what terrifying events did he witness alone in lunar orbit? In today's video, we will reveal these truths. Let's start. The year was 1962, and America was locked in the most intense technological competition in human history. President John F. Kennedy had thrown down the gauntlet with his audacious declaration to land humans on the moon before the decade's end. But behind the patriotic fervor and scientific achievement lay a darker reality that few understood at the time. The Apollo program wasn't just about exploration. It was about proving American superiority during the height of the Cold War. Every decision, every risk, every human life put on the line served this greater political purpose. The pressure was immense, and it would ultimately create psychological burdens that no training could prepare the astronauts for. NASA's Apollo project was a carefully orchestrated sequence of increasingly complex missions, from suborbital flights to orbital maneuvers, from docking procedures to lunar simulations. Each step brought them closer to the ultimate goal. But with each advancement came greater risks and more terrifying possibilities of failure. The spacecraft itself was a marvel of engineering, consisting of three critical components. The massive Saturn V rocket provided the raw power needed to escape Earth's gravitational pull, generating thrust equivalent to 85 Hoover dams. The command module, Columbia, served as home, control center, and the only way back to Earth for the three astronauts. And finally, the lunar module, Eagle, designed to separate from Columbia and carry two men to the lunar surface while leaving one behind. That one man left behind would be Michael Collins, and his role would prove far more psychologically demanding than anyone anticipated. What goes through your mind when you realize that one astronaut was left behind orbiting the moon while the other two made history on the surface? Comment and chat with me. On July 20th, 1969, history was made. While Armstrong and Aldrin descended in Eagle to the moon's surface, Collins orbited alone in Columbia at 3,700 miles per hour. The world saw a triumph. Collins faced a different reality. Armstrong and Aldrin spent 2.5 hours on the moon conducting experiments, collecting samples, and planting the American flag. 650 million people watched on television as they became pioneers, the first humans to walk on another world. Meanwhile, Collins endured what he later called the most terrifying experience of his life. The landing was only the start of Collins' ordeal. The lunar module had to lift off and meet Columbia perfectly. If the ascent engine failed or calculations were wrong, Armstrong and Aldrin would be stranded on the moon forever. Collins would then return alone, burdened by their deaths and the failure of mankind's greatest achievement. After 21 hours on the lunar surface, Eagle's upper stage fired to ascend. Collins watched anxiously, knowing everything depended on this moment. There was no backup plan or rescue mission. When Eagle docked successfully with Columbia, Collins felt overwhelming relief. Still, the fear, isolation, and crushing responsibility left deep scars that haunted him for decades. While two men made history on the surface, one man faced his lonely battle in orbit, one that few could ever imagine. Michael Collins, born in 1930 in Rome to a military family, was shaped by discipline and duty. He graduated from West Point in 1952 and served as a fighter pilot during the Korean War. Collins was not just a passenger on Apollo 11 but a skilled test pilot and engineer. His years of rigorous training and previous spaceflight on Gemini 10, where he performed 2 spacewalks, proved his abilities. However, nothing prepared him for the psychological challenges of Apollo 11. Unlike Armstrong and Aldrin, who shared the lunar experience, Collins faced his ordeal completely alone. For 48 minutes each orbit, as Columbia passed behind the moon, he was cut off from all contact, more isolated than anyone before. His technical responsibilities were complex and critical, maintaining Columbia's systems, calculating rendezvous paths, and preparing for docking maneuvers that would determine his crewmates' survival. Every decision could mean triumph or tragedy. The psychological weight almost broke him. Collins mentally prepared for the worst, returning to Earth alone. He rehearsed words for the families of Armstrong and Aldrin and imagined facing the world's media, explaining how the heroes were left to die while he orbited above. This mental preparation was both a professional duty and self-inflicted psychological torture necessary for facing the worst-case scenario. Before continuing, I have a special 10-second request for all of you listening. If you can help me in any way, please hit the notification bell and subscribe. It helps this channel so much. And if you do that, I will do everything I can to make this show even better for you. Deal? While the world watched Armstrong and Aldrin, Collins carried out one of the most demanding roles in spaceflight history. As command module pilot, he was more than a pilot. He was the lifeline, guardian, and the only hope for his crewmates' safe return. The undocking was risky. Collins had to carefully separate Eagle from Columbia, ensuring both were correctly positioned for the lunar descent. A single error could have sent Eagle spinning or damaged the docking system needed for their reunion. After Eagle's departure, Collins faced a mission phase he later described as both peaceful and terrifying. Alone in Columbia, he monitored critical systems, maintained contact with mission control, and prepared for the complicated rendezvous ahead. The rendezvous and docking were the mission's most technically demanding parts. Collins calculated precise orbits, timed engine burns perfectly, and guided Columbia to intercept Eagle as it returned from the moon. The margin for error was nearly zero. But the greatest burden was psychological. Collins knew if the lunar ascent engine failed, Eagle couldn't return, and he faced an impossible choice: attempt a rescue risking all lives or return to Earth alone. NASA prepared him with contingency plans and words to say. Still, no training could ease the horror of potentially abandoning his crewmates to die. This reality haunted him throughout. Every lost radio signal, every silence from the moon deepened his dread. He lived in constant fear that the mission could end in tragedy. But the technical strain was nothing compared to the crushing weight of silence and isolation Collins would endure behind the moon's shadow. The hardest psychological challenge for Collins came during Columbia's passage behind the moon. For 48 minutes each 2-hour orbit, the moon blocked all radio signals, leaving Collins completely isolated. No contact with mission control, no communication with Armstrong and Aldrin, and no connection to the billions watching on Earth. This was more than physical isolation. It was profound existential loneliness. He was farther from home than anyone before, orbiting a lifeless world in absolute silence. The impact was deep and enduring. During these blackouts, Collins faced his deepest fears alone. He couldn't know if Armstrong and Aldrin were safe or if the mission was successful. No updates came, leaving him with only his thoughts, fears, and heavy responsibility. The far side of the moon added to his burden. Unlike the familiar near side, it was a harsh, cratered landscape untouched by sunlight. This dead, alien world seemed to embody the mission's possible disaster. Collins described these times as both terrifying and strangely peaceful. The terror came from isolation and uncertainty about his crewmates' fate or the mission's status. Yet he found calm in the silence and stunning cosmic views. Temperature extremes worsened the stress. On the dark side, it dropped to -250 degrees Fahrenheit. On the sunlit side, it soared to 250 above zero. He knew only Columbia's thin walls stood between him and death in space. Most disturbing was the knowledge that if systems failed or he became incapacitated, no rescue would come. He would die alone, while his crewmates remained stranded on the moon. This unbearable weight defined his ordeal. To understand Collins' psychological ordeal, we must grasp the mission's technical challenges and risks. Apollo 11 pushed human technology and endurance to the limit, with many chances for disaster. The first challenge was the communication blackout. Radio waves cannot pass through solid objects like the moon, so any craft on its far side was cut off from Earth for nearly an hour each orbit. For Collins, this was a nightmare. During these blackouts, he had no way to know if Armstrong and Aldrin were alive or if the mission was succeeding. The uncertainty was devastating. The second challenge was the harsh lunar environment. The surface had sharp rocks, deep craters, and fine dust that could damage equipment. Temperatures swung from minus 250 degrees Fahrenheit in shadow to plus 250 degrees Fahrenheit in sunlight. Every step, landing, walking, and launch carried danger. Any failure stranded the moonwalkers with no rescue. The third challenge was limited knowledge of the moon itself. In 1969, only grainy photos from unmanned probes existed. No one knew the exact surface conditions or landing hazards. Collins knew his crewmates faced unknown risks, raising his stress with each moment on the lunar surface. The fourth was the complex rendezvous and docking. Collins had to perform perfect orbital maneuvers to meet Eagle returning from the moon. Timing, calculations, and execution had to be flawless. Collins estimated only a 50-50 chance of success. He lived knowing he might have to return alone, a mental torture few could bear. Perhaps the hardest part was the world watching. Apollo 11 symbolized human achievement and American strength. Failure meant more than crewmate deaths. It risked crushing humanity's dream and confidence in space exploration. The weight of this responsibility was nearly unbearable. And yet, amid these unforgiving conditions, Collins faced something even harder, a profound shift in how he saw Earth and humanity itself. During his lonely orbits behind the moon, Collins faced an experience no human had faced before. Cut off from Earth and all familiar signs of life, he was surrounded only by the mechanical hum of Columbia's systems. From his window, Earth looked like a fragile, tiny blue marble floating in endless space, a powerful and lasting sight. But the moon's far side was haunting. Unlike the familiar face of the moon, it was a lifeless, cratered wasteland, cold and hostile. Collins felt as if he was staring into death itself, a stark reminder of how rare and precious life is. His isolation deepened a cognitive shift now called the overview effect. He saw Earth not as divided nations but as one fragile organism coping in a harsh universe. Political conflicts seemed small and meaningless from 240,000 miles away. This realization was both enlightening and terrifying. Collins knew that if he returned alone, he would carry the burden of explaining humanity's vulnerability and losses. The silence was profound. Only the sounds of Columbia's systems accompanied him. His mind began imagining voices, making him talk to himself to stay sane and rehearse the terrible words he might face if alone on Earth. The isolation changed him. He grew harder and more detached, accepting the unthinkable possibility of abandoning his friends. Collins understood that space exploration meant confronting the darkest sides of humanity. The cosmos was indifferent to human hope, suffering, or prayer, completely merciless. As Columbia emerged from behind the moon, Collins witnessed Earthrise, the small blue-white Earth rising over the lunar horizon. This breathtaking sight brought him brief relief from his psychological torment. For a few minutes he could forget the dangers facing his crewmates, the weight of responsibility, and simply marvel at the journey. Yet Earthrise also deepened his isolation and burden. That fragile world held everything he loved, his family, friends, and life. If he failed to bring Armstrong and Aldrin home, he would face them all and explain his failure. Collins' overview effect was intense and traumatic due to his isolation. He saw Earth not just from space but as potentially the sole survivor of humanity's greatest adventure. He realized Apollo was more than a political competition. It was humanity's first step into the cosmos, a moment he witnessed amid terrifying loneliness and responsibility. This realization made him see himself as a guardian of human civilization. If his crewmates died, he alone would tell the story that shaped future generations' understanding of this historic event. The honor was immense, but so was the crushing fear and survivor's guilt. During his lonely orbits, Collins grasped humanity's fragile place in a vast, indifferent universe. We are explorers in a cold cosmos, vulnerable to sudden destruction. This perspective later influenced his advocacy for space exploration as vital for human survival, Earth a tiny oasis in a vast desert. Still, during those dark hours, these insights brought little comfort. Collins faced isolation and responsibility that no training could ease, learning that the human mind struggles under such extremes, a high psychological cost for humanity's cosmic ambitions. Subscribe now for more untold stories behind history's greatest moments. because true heroism often lies beyond what we see. At the core of Collins' decades-long torment was a secret he hid even from his family. While the world celebrated the moon landing, Collins wrestled with a terrifying personal fear, the possibility of abandoning Armstrong and Aldrin on the lunar surface. NASA's protocol was clear. If the lunar module failed to return, Collins was to return to Earth alone rather than risk all their lives. But no training prepared him for the psychological reality of this choice. During his lonely orbits, Collins mentally rehearsed firing Columbia's engines and leaving his crewmates behind to die. This preparation felt logical yet horrifying. He understood a rescue attempt would likely kill all three, but emotionally the cost was unimaginable. He confronted the brutal truth that survival instinct might override friendship and loyalty. Obsessed with planning his solo return, Collins calculated fuel, rehearsed communications, and imagined explaining himself to the world. Disturbingly, he began to see that if Armstrong and Aldrin died, Collins would be remembered as both a survivor and a witness to history, a tormenting duality. This shattered Collins' self-image. Isolation and stress revealed a colder, harder side he hadn't known existed, a man capable of sacrificing friends to survive. He imagined living with the burden of their deaths and the shame of abandonment. Part of him even hoped circumstances forced that outcome, sparing him the guilt of choice. This self-loathing haunted him for decades, showing how extreme pressure can transform even the most loyal into something unrecognizable. The moment that would define the rest of Collins' life came during Eagle's ascent from the lunar surface. As he watched through Columbia's window, Collins saw a speck of light rising from the moon's surface, the upper stage of the lunar module carrying Armstrong and Aldrin back to orbit. For Collins, this moment represented both salvation and damnation. The successful launch meant that his crewmates were alive and that the rendezvous was possible. But it also meant that he would have to live with the knowledge of what he had been prepared to do, what he had been capable of doing if circumstances had been different. The rendezvous and docking procedures that followed were technically flawless, but for Collins they were emotionally devastating. As Eagle approached Columbia, Collins found himself looking into the faces of the two men he had been prepared to abandon. Armstrong and Aldrin were jubilant, excited to share their experiences on the lunar surface, completely unaware of the psychological hell their crewmate had endured. Collins managed to maintain his professional composure during the docking and the journey home, but inside he was falling apart. The relief of having his crewmates safely aboard was overwhelming, but it was mixed with shame, guilt, and self-loathing that would plague him for decades to come. The successful completion of the Apollo 11 mission was celebrated worldwide as humanity's greatest achievement. Collins participated in the parades, the press conferences, and the celebrations, but he felt like a fraud. While the world praised him as a hero, he knew the truth about what he had been prepared to do. The psychological aftermath of the mission was brutal for Collins. He suffered from what would now be recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder, but in 1969, there was little understanding or support for astronauts dealing with the psychological effects of spaceflight. Collins was expected to be a hero, not a victim of his mind. Collins began to withdraw from public life, declining many speaking engagements and interviews. He couldn't bear to talk about the mission, because every question reminded him of his secret shame. When people praised his courage and dedication, he felt like he was deceiving them about his true nature. The isolation that Collins had experienced behind the moon continued long after his return to Earth. He felt disconnected from his family, his colleagues, and society in general. The man who had returned from the moon was fundamentally different from the one who had left Earth, and Collins struggled to reconcile these two versions of himself. For decades, Collins carried this burden alone. He couldn't share his secret with his wife because he was afraid she would see him differently. He couldn't tell his children because he didn't want to destroy their image of their heroic father. He couldn't confide in his NASA colleagues because he feared it would damage his reputation and career. The weight of this secret grew heavier with each passing year. Collins watched as other Apollo astronauts were celebrated as heroes, knowing that he harbored a dark truth that would shatter the public's perception of the mission. He began to see himself as a living lie, a false hero whose true nature had been revealed in the darkness behind the moon. Collins' struggle with his secret was compounded by the changing public perception of the Apollo program. As the years passed, the moon landings were increasingly seen as humanity's greatest achievement, a triumph of courage, dedication, and human spirit. Collins knew that his story would complicate this narrative, revealing the darker psychological realities of space exploration. The breaking point came decades later, when Collins was in his 80s and facing his mortality. The weight of carrying this secret for so long had become unbearable, and he realized that he needed to tell the truth before it died with him. The decision to reveal his secret was perhaps the most courageous act of his life. Michael Collins finally revealed his terrifying secret after more than 50 years, confessing that he had been mentally prepared to abandon his crewmates on the lunar surface. This shocked many and forced a new perspective on the Apollo 11 mission. His confession showed that space exploration is not just about technology but about facing the darkest parts of human nature. It strips away facades and reveals who we truly are when confronted with impossible choices. Collins' story teaches that heroism isn't about being flawless or fearless but about struggling with good and evil and choosing what is right. Though prepared to abandon them, Collins fulfilled his duties perfectly and brought Armstrong and Aldrin safely home. His long-held secret became a gift to humanity by exposing the psychological and moral challenges of space travel. As new missions to the Moon and Mars approach, Collins' experience reminds us to prepare our minds and souls, not just our technology. Collins passed away in 2021, finally at peace after sharing his story. His legacy stands as a testament to the true cost of exploration, courage, fear, loneliness, and humanity's complex nature. Apollo 11 is remembered as one of humanity's greatest achievements. Thanks to Collins, we understand it was also a profound exploration of the human spirit, the loneliness behind the moon reflecting both heroism and horror within us all. Thanks for being with us. Leave a comment, like to show your support, and remember to hit that subscribe button for more exciting videos. See you next time.